My name is Claire Hartwell, and I'm 32 years old. I'm standing in my father's Manhattan penthouse study, and my hands won't stop shaking. I just handed him a letter, one single page that took me 2 weeks to write. Robert Hartwell, real estate mogul, my father, the man who controlled every breath I took for 3 decades, finishes reading it. Then he does something I didn't expect. He laughs. Not a chuckle, not a polite dismissal. A genuine, head thrown back, belly laugh that echoes off the mahogany walls lined with awards and accolades, celebrating his ruthless business empire. His new wife, Natalie, stands beside him, smirking like she just won something. I'm forfeiting $85 million, walking away from everything, and he thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. Before we dive into how I got here, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, hit that like button because this story is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened when my father finally understood what that letter really meant. I grew up in a golden prison. That's the only way I can describe it now, looking back. When you're inside it, you don't see the bars because they're made of privilege and opportunity and everything money can buy. My mother died when I was 8. Car accident on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. One moment, I had a mom who read me bedtime stories and let me put too much chocolate syrup on my ice cream, and the next, I had a father who looked at me like I was a business asset that needed proper management. Robert Hartwell didn't know what to do with a grieving 8-year-old daughter, so he did what he knew best. He built a plan. Harvard for undergrad, business school, then a position at Hartwell Properties. My life was mapped out before I finished elementary school. I never questioned it because I didn't know I was supposed to. When you grow up with a parent who presents love as a transaction, you learn to perform for approval. I got straight A's. I joined the right clubs. I networked at charity galas in dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I became exactly what he wanted. A perfect little Hartwell. By the time I graduated from Harvard Business School, I was 24 and I'd never made a single real decision for myself. Father decided where I lived, a company-owned penthouse on the Upper East Side. He decided what I wore, because image mattered, and a Hartwell always looked impeccable. He had opinions on my haircut, my friends, the restaurants I frequented. Everything was about the brand, the empire, the legacy. I worked at Hartwell Properties for 7 years, and I was good at it, really good. I understood real estate, I understood numbers, I understood how to negotiate and when to walk away from a bad deal. But I never understood why none of it made me happy. The cracks started showing about 6 months before that day in the study. Father called me into his office and told me I was getting engaged. Not asked, told. Preston Montgomery III, son of Montgomery Development, one of Father's business partners. Preston was 35, handsome in that generic wealthy way, and absolutely insufferable. He talked about himself constantly, interrupted me in meetings, and treated service staff like they were invisible. But Father said it was a good match, a strategic alliance between 2 real estate families. He used the word alliance, like we were medieval kingdoms instead of people. I tried to make it work, because that's what I did. I performed. Preston and I attended benefits together, smiled for society page photographers, played the part of the perfect power couple. Then I caught him at a charity gala in a coat closet with a blonde woman in a silver dress. They weren't just talking. I stood there in my designer gown, $1,000 shoes, hair done perfectly, and I felt nothing. Not heartbreak, not anger. Just this creeping numbness that scared me more than any emotion could have. When I told Father, he poured himself a scotch and said something I'll never forget. Marriage is a business arrangement, Claire. Love is for poor people who can't afford better options. That sentence cracked something fundamental inside me. I looked at this man who was supposed to protect me, supposed to want my happiness, and I saw a stranger. Worse, I saw what I was becoming: cold, calculating, empty. I'd been so busy being a good daughter, a good executive, a good representation of the Hartwell name, that I'd never stopped to ask who Claire actually was underneath all of it. I started volunteering at a community center in Brooklyn. I didn't tell Father. I'd leave the office, change out of my business clothes in a coffee shop bathroom, and take the subway to a neighborhood I'd never spent time in before. The center served at-risk youth, kids from backgrounds nothing like mine. They were loud and messy and honest in ways I'd never been allowed to be. The director, a woman named Iris with gray locks and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, put me to work teaching basic business skills workshops. These kids didn't care about my last name or my pedigree. They cared if I showed up, if I listened, if I actually gave a damn. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Father found out, of course. He had people who kept track of me. He called me into his office and told me I was done with that nonsense. Those were his exact words, nonsense. He said it was beneath a Hartwell to spend time in that neighborhood with those people. The classism dripped from every syllable. I tried to explain that I liked the work, that it felt meaningful. He cut me off and said, "Meaningful doesn't pay dividends." Then he banned me from going back. Not asked. Banned. Like I was 12 instead of 31. That's when I started planning my escape, even though I didn't fully realize it yet. Natalie walked into our lives like a hurricane in Louboutins. Father met her at some gallery opening, and 6 months later, they were married. She was 28, 11 years younger than me, a former model with Instagram followers and no substance. I tried to be welcoming because I wanted Father to be happy. I really did. But Natalie didn't want a stepdaughter. She wanted an obstacle removed. The first thing she did was redecorate. Not just her spaces, not just updating things. She threw out everything that reminded anyone my mother had existed in that house. Photo albums disappeared. My mother's favorite reading chair, gone. The china my mother collected, donated. I came home one day to find boxes of my mother's belongings sitting by the service entrance like trash. When I confronted Natalie, she shrugged and said the house needed a fresh start. Father stood there and said I was being too sentimental about my dead mother's memory. That's when I realized he'd changed in ways I hadn't wanted to see. Or maybe this had always been who he was, and I'd just been too young, too controlled, too desperate for his approval to notice. Natalie inserted herself into the business despite having zero qualifications. She'd show up to meetings in designer outfits, contribute nothing, and Father would nod along like she'd said something profound. Meanwhile, I'd been working my way up for 7 years, proving myself in every deal, and my ideas were constantly dismissed. I brought a proposal to a board meeting about affordable housing development. Not charity, a legitimate business model that would generate steady returns while actually helping the community. I'd done months of research, had the numbers to back it up, knew it could work. Father laughed. Right there in front of the entire executive board, he laughed at my presentation. He said, "We're not a charity, we maximize shareholder value, and maybe when I understood business better, I could contribute meaningfully." I wanted to disappear into the floor. Then, that same week, Natalie was given a VP title. No experience, no credentials, just a wedding ring and a pretty face. She got an office, a salary that made my stomach turn, and Father's complete support. He praised her ideas, which were usually just rehashed things she'd seen on HGTV. My humiliation was complete. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday evening. Father called me into his study. Natalie perched on the edge of his desk like a decorative bird. He told me I had a choice. Marry Preston by Christmas and take my place in the family legacy, or refuse and be removed from company leadership entirely. I stared at him. This man I'd spent my whole life trying to please, and I asked the question I should have asked years ago. What if I don't want either of those things? What if I want something different? His face went cold. Then you're no daughter of mine. You'll get nothing. Not the company position, not the inheritance, nothing. You'll be cut off completely and you'll see exactly how hard life is without the Hartwell name protecting you. Natalie smiled. Actually smiled, and I understood this had been her play all along. Remove me from the picture, secure her position as the sole heir. Father was too blinded by whatever hold she had on him to see he was being manipulated. I sat in my penthouse that night, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, surrounded by luxury I'd never chosen, wearing clothes I didn't pick, living a life that had been prescribed for me like medicine. I was 32 years old, and I'd never made a single authentic choice. Every decision had been filtered through what Father wanted, what the business needed, what a Hartwell should do. I felt like I was suffocating. That's when I decided. I was going to walk away from all of it. The money, the company, the name, everything. I was going to find out who Claire actually was when she wasn't performing for anyone. Planning my escape took 3 months, and I had to be more careful than a criminal. Father had eyes everywhere, people who reported back to him. I couldn't use family lawyers or anyone in our social circle. I found an attorney in Queens through a legal aid website, a woman named Susan Rodriguez who worked in a cramped office above a bakery and charged reasonable rates. She looked at me like I was insane when I explained what I wanted to do, but she helped me anyway. That's when I discovered the trust fund from my maternal grandmother. It wasn't huge, just $120,000, but my grandmother had set it up before she died to be outside Father's control. Head never mentioned it because, compared to the family fortune, it was pocket change. To me, it was freedom. It was enough to survive on while I figured out my next steps. Susan helped me access it quietly, helped me understand what I was giving up legally. The inheritance was worth approximately $85 million, my share of the family trust and company stock. Walking away meant forfeiting it permanently. I found an apartment in Queens, a tiny 4th-floor walk-up that cost $1,200 a month. It was 400 square feet with old carpet and a kitchen the size of a closet. I'd lived in penthouses my entire adult life. This place didn't even have a doorman, but I signed the lease under my friend's name, someone from college Father didn't know about, and I felt this rush of exhilaration. This was mine. Not bought by him, not controlled by him, mine. Iris from the community center became my lifeline. I'd started volunteering again in secret, taking elaborate precautions to make sure Father didn't find out. I told Iris what I was planning, and instead of trying to talk me out of it, she just asked if I was sure. I wasn't, not completely, but I was sure I couldn't stay. She introduced me to Marcus, one of the teachers at the center. He taught history and coached basketball, and he was the first man I'd met who didn't care about my money or connections. He didn't know about them yet. To him, I was just Claire, a volunteer who showed up consistently and actually cared about the kids. We started getting coffee after our shifts, talking about everything except the life I was about to leave behind. Writing the letter took 2 weeks because I wanted to get it exactly right. I didn't want to be angry or accusatory, I just wanted to be clear. I explained that I was forfeiting my inheritance voluntarily, that I was resigning from Hartwell Properties effective immediately, and that I was asking for nothing except to be left alone to build my own life. I thanked him for the education and opportunities because, despite everything, I had been privileged. But I told him the cost had been too high. That I'd rather have nothing and be free than have everything and be his prisoner. That's the line I ended with. I read it over and over, and every time I knew it was true. But Natalie found a draft. It'd been careless, left it in my office when I went to a meeting. She went through my desk, found my plans, and immediately ran to Father with a new narrative. She told him I was mentally unstable, having a breakdown, that I needed intervention before I did something dangerous. Father brought in the family doctor, Dr. Harrison, who'd been on the Hartwell payroll for 20 years. They wanted him to evaluate me, to declare me incompetent so they could take control of my decisions under the guise of protecting me. I refused the evaluation. I knew what they were doing, trying to paint me as crazy so nothing I said would have credibility. But refusing made me look exactly like what they were claiming. Unstable, irrational, unable to make sound decisions. Natalie played it perfectly, crying to Father about how worried she was about me, how I needed help. Father started making noises about having me committed for observation. That's when I knew I had to move faster than I'd planned. I couldn't give them time to build a legal case for incompetency. The day I walked away, Father orchestrated a full intervention. I showed up at the penthouse, expecting a private conversation, and found an audience. Natalie perched on the sofa in head-to-toe Chanel, looking sympathetic in a way that made my skin crawl. Preston slouched in an armchair, still somehow convinced we were getting back together. The family lawyer, Mitchell Sterling, stood near the window with his briefcase, ready to make everything official. They'd planned this ambush, thinking the pressure would break me. I pulled the letter from my bag and placed it on Father's desk. My hand shook, but my voice didn't. I told him it was my formal resignation and refusal of inheritance, and that I'd already had it reviewed by independent legal counsel. That's when he started laughing. That deep, genuine laughter like I'd just told the best joke Head ever heard. He actually wiped tears from his eyes. You'll come crawling back within a month, he said. You've never worked a real day in your life. You've never struggled, you have no idea what you're giving up. Preston stood up and got in my face. You're nothing without your father's money. You're a Hartwell, that's your only value. Without the name, you're just another pretty face, and not even that good looking. The cruelty was casual, like he was commenting on the weather. Natalie chimed in, her voice sticky sweet. You'll be waiting tables within a week, sweetie. Maybe you could get a job at one of those little places you like to volunteer at. She made volunteering sound like a disease. Mitchell went through the legal document line by line, making sure I understood this was permanent and irrevocable. Once I signed, I could never contest the will, never claim any portion of the estate, never use the Hartwell name for business purposes. He was trying to scare me. It should have worked. $85 million, financial security for life, access to power and influence. I was signing it all away for uncertainty and struggle, but all I felt was relief. Father made one last attempt. Claire, think about what you're doing. You're throwing away your future out of spite. This is about Preston, isn't it? We can find you someone else, someone better. This can all be fixed. But he still didn't understand. It wasn't about Preston or Natalie or any one thing. It was about all of it, the accumulated weight of 32 years of being told who to be and never being asked who I wanted to become. I signed the papers. Mitchell notarized them right there, and just like that, I was no longer an heiress. Father's face went from amused to calculating. He picked up his phone immediately, and I knew what he was doing. Calling in favors, burning bridges for me before I could even cross them. By the time I left that penthouse, every major company in Manhattan would know not to hire Claire Hartwell. Every social connection would be poisoned. He was going to make sure my fall was as hard as possible. His PR team worked fast. Within 24 hours, there were blind items in gossip columns about a real estate heiress having a breakdown. Social media lit up with speculation that I was in rehab or had joined a cult. Friends I'd known for years stopped returning my calls. People I'd gone to Harvard with suddenly couldn't remember my name. Father had activated his entire network to make me a pariah. If I wouldn't be his daughter on his terms, I wouldn't be welcomed anywhere in his world. I went back to the penthouse one last time to get my things. I packed a single suitcase. Jeans, sweaters, practical clothes I'd barely ever worn. I left behind the designer gowns, the jewelry, the handbags worth thousands. I took my mother's photo album because Natalie hadn't found that hiding spot. I took my laptop and phone, then thought better of it. They were on Father's accounts, and he could track them. So I left them on the kitchen counter along with all the credit cards, the keys to the penthouse, the keys to the car I never drove because I always had a driver. Walking out of that building for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. The doorman, Gerald, who'd worked there for 15 years, looked at me with something like respect. "Good luck, Miss Claire," he whispered. "I think you're doing the right thing." It was the first supportive thing anyone from my old life had said. I took the subway to Queens carrying one suitcase and a mother's photo album. I had $120,000, a tiny apartment, and absolutely no idea what came next. I was terrified. I was free. The first month was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd prepared myself for downgrading my lifestyle, but I hadn't prepared for how completely unprepared I was for normal life. I didn't know how to cook anything beyond toast. I'd never paid a utility bill. I didn't understand how Metro cards worked or that you needed quarters for laundry. Every single day presented some new challenge that revealed exactly how sheltered I'd been. The apartment building was loud. Upstairs, neighbors fought at 2 a.m. Someone on my floor had a dog that barked constantly. The radiator clanged and hissed and barely produced heat. There were roaches, actual roaches. I cried the first time I saw one scuttle across the kitchen counter. Not because I was disgusted, though I was, but because this was real life and had been so insulated from it that a bug felt like a catastrophe. I applied to 73 jobs in the first month. Receptionist positions, administrative assistant roles, anything entry-level that didn't require specific experience. I had an Ivy League education and 7 years at a major real estate company, but Father's blacklisting was thorough. It'd get to second or third interviews, then suddenly, the position would be filled. Or they'd call my references, and whoever father had gotten to would tank my chances. I was qualified for so many positions, but my last name had become a liability. Finally, I got hired as a receptionist at a dental office in Astoria. Dr. Patel was kind, an older Indian man who asked why someone with my credentials wanted such a basic position. I told him I was trying to start over, and maybe he understood something in that because he took a chance on me. $32,000 a year. I'd spent more than that on a single handbag before. My first paycheck, after taxes, was $1,800 for 2 weeks of work. My rent alone was $1,200 a month. The math was terrifying. Then father found the legal loophole for my grandmother's trust fund. Susan called me, frustrated and apologetic. There was an obscure clause that gave the family executor discretion to freeze assets if they deemed the beneficiary was making financially irresponsible decisions. Father had activated it, arguing that my forfeiture of the inheritance proved I wasn't mentally capable of managing money. It was manipulation disguised as concern. The trust fund was frozen pending a court review that could take months. I had $3,400 left in my checking account. Dr. Patel let me go after 2 months. He called me into his office looking genuinely sorry. Someone had called him, he said, and suggested that employing me might affect his referral network. He had a family practice to protect. He gave me 2 weeks severance, which was generous, and a recommendation letter, which was kind. But I was unemployed again, and this time I was almost out of money. I ate ramen noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because they cost 22 cents a pack. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation. I walked everywhere to save metro fare. The landlord left an eviction warning on my door because I was 6 days late with rent. I'd never been late for anything in my life because I'd never had to worry about money. Now I was calculating how many times I could reasonably split a pack of instant noodles. One night in December, the heat stopped working completely. It was 15 degrees outside, and I sat wrapped in every blanket I owned, wearing 2 sweaters and a coat, and I could see my breath in my own apartment. I thought about calling father. The number was still in my head even though I'd ditched the phone. One call and this would all stop. I could apologize, say I'd made a mistake, beg for forgiveness. He'd probably make me grovel, make me earn my way back, but at least I'd be warm. At least I'd have food. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at a neighbor's phone number on the wall, thinking about asking to borrow it. That's how close I came. Then I thought about that letter, about the line that had made father laugh. I'd rather have nothing and be free than have everything and be your prisoner. If I called him now, I'd be proving him right, proving I couldn't survive without him. The thought made me angry enough to get through the night. Preston started showing up drunk at my building. The restraining order I'd filed did nothing because he had lawyers who made problems disappear. He'd bang on my door at 11 at night, shouting about how I'd humiliated him, how I'd regret walking away. The neighbors called the police twice, but by the time they arrived, Preston's driver had gotten him back to his car. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob, jumping at every sound. Then, one freezing evening, there was a gentle knock. I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Chen from across the hall stood there holding a container of homemade soup. She was 80-something, tiny, with silver hair and sharp eyes. "I heard crying," she said in accented English. "Nobody should be alone when they cry." She came in, looked around my pathetic apartment, and didn't judge. She just heated up the soup on my 2-burner stove and sat with me while I ate it. Mrs. Chen told me her story while I ate. She'd been married to a wealthy man in Taiwan decades ago. He was controlling, abusive, treated her like property. She escaped with nothing, came to America, worked in garment factories, cleaned houses, survived. Now she lived simply in this crappy building because she'd never wanted to depend on anyone again. "You did brave thing," she said. "Brave is not same as easy. But you survive." I survived, you will too. It was the first time since leaving that anyone had told me I'd made the right choice. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning in January. The community center had an opening for a youth coordinator. Iris had recommended me. It paid $38,000 a year, which wasn't much by any standard but felt like winning the lottery compared to my current situation of nothing. I interviewed with the executive director, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who asked me directly why someone with my background wanted to work with at-risk kids for barely above minimum wage. I told her the truth. Because for the first time in my life, I want to do work that matters more than money. Because these kids need someone who sees them as people, not problems. Because I've spent 7 years maximizing shareholder value and it made me miserable, and 3 months volunteering here made me feel alive. She hired me on the spot. I started the following Monday, and it felt like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. The work was harder than anything I'd done at Hartwell Properties. I ran after-school programs, coordinated with social workers, helped kids with homework, broke up fights, listened to problems I had no idea how to solve. These weren't theoretical numbers on a spreadsheet. They were 15-year-olds, dealing with poverty, family dysfunction, violence, all the things my privilege had shielded me from. I learned more about real life in 3 weeks at that job than I had in 32 years. The kids responded to me because I was honest with them. I told them I'd grown up rich and didn't understand their world, but I wanted to learn. They appreciated that I didn't pretend to have all the answers. We did resume workshops and I taught them how to interview, how to present themselves professionally, but they taught me more. About resilience, about finding joy in small things, about community and loyalty and showing up for people even when it's hard. Then, Father's lawyers sent me a cease and desist letter. They claimed I was using the Hartwell name inappropriately, trading on family reputation for professional gain. It was absurd. I was working at a nonprofit in Queens, but they demanded I legally change my name or face a lawsuit. Fighting it would cost thousands I didn't have. So I went to the courthouse and filed the paperwork myself. Claire Hartwell Morrison. Morrison was my mother's maiden name. It felt right, honoring her while separating myself from him. The name change cost me $5,000 I had to borrow from Susan, my lawyer, who was becoming something like a friend. It wiped out what little savings I'd managed to rebuild. But I had my job, I had my apartment, I was paying my bills on time. I learned to cook basic meals from YouTube videos. I got a library card and borrowed books instead of buying them. I walked in Prospect Park on weekends. I made friends with coworkers, real friendships based on who I was now, not what family I came from. Marcus and I started seeing each other, slowly and carefully. He knew about my background by then. Iris had filled him in because she didn't want him blindsided if my old life came crashing in. But Marcus didn't care. Had grown up in the Bronx, worked 2 jobs to get through college, became a teacher because he wanted to give back. He thought what I'd done was brave. He was the first person outside Mrs. Chen to say that and mean it. Natalie sent me Instagram posts. Shed found my new account somehow, and Shed accidentally sent me things. Photos of her wearing my mother's diamond necklace with captions about timeless elegance. Pictures in my childhood bedroom, which Shed redecorated entirely in blush pink and gold, with comments about finally making the space beautiful. A video tour of the penthouse talking about how Shed removed all the dark, depressing energy. She wanted me to break, to react, to give her the satisfaction of knowing Shed gotten to me. I blocked her after the post where she wore my mother's wedding ring, the one Father had kept in a safe after Mom died. That was the line. Not because the ring mattered, not really, things are just things. But because Natalie was desecrating my mother's memory for Instagram likes, and Father was letting her. I realized something important then. My mother's memory lived in my heart, in the values Shed taught me before she died. Natalie could wear every piece of jewelry, redecorate every room, but she couldn't touch what actually mattered. That realization felt like freedom. 6 months after walking away, I looked at my life and barely recognized it. I lived in a tiny apartment that I'd slowly made cozy with thrift store finds and plants. I had a job that exhausted me but fulfilled me. I had a boyfriend who made me laugh and didn't care that I couldn't afford fancy restaurants. I had friends who'd never heard of Hartwell Properties and didn't care. I wasn't wealthy, some months were still tight financially, but I was happy in a way I'd never been in the penthouse. That was worth more than $85 million. Life had settled into a rhythm I never expected to find satisfying. My alarm went off at 6:30 on weekday mornings, and instead of dreading the day, I actually looked forward to it. The commute to the community center on the Q train, surrounded by real New Yorkers heading to real jobs, felt more authentic than any chauffeur-driven ride ever had. I'd grab coffee from the bodega on the corner where Ahmed knew my order and asked about my weekend. These small, ordinary moments were treasures. Then Father's assistant called, not Father himself, which told me everything. Diane had worked for him for 20 years, and her voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. "Miss Hartwell, I thought you should know your father had a heart attack. He's at Mount Sinai. He's stable, but it was serious." She gave me the room number and hung up before I could ask questions. I stood in my apartment holding my phone, feeling this complicated knot of emotions I couldn't untangle. I didn't want to care. Head cut me off, blacklisted me, made my life as difficult as possible for the crime of wanting independence. Head laughed at my pain and weaponized his power against me. Why should I rush to his bedside? But he was still my father. The man who'd held my hand at my mother's funeral. Who'd taught me to ride a bike in Central Park. Who'd been at every school play, even when work was crushing him. Those memories existed alongside the cruelty, and I couldn't just delete them. I called in sick to work, which I never did, and took the train to Manhattan. Mount Sinai felt like returning to my old world. The private wing where Father had a suite, not a regular room. Security that nodded me through because even though I'd changed my name, my face was still familiar. Everything smelled like money and antiseptic. I felt underdressed in my Target jeans and secondhand coat, conscious of how much I'd changed in 6 months. Father was asleep when I got to the room. Natalie was there, perfectly made up even in a hospital setting, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and her expression cycled through surprise, annoyance, and then calculation. Well, well, look who came crawling back. Father stirred, opened his eyes, saw me. For a second, just a second, he looked relieved. Then the mask came back down. "Come to see if you can weasel back into the will?" His voice was weak, but the cruelty was strong as ever. "Natalie, make sure she doesn't steal anything on her way out." I should have left right then, should have turned around and walked away from his poison. But I'd come all this way and I needed him to know something. "I'm here because, despite everything, you're still my father. I don't want your money. I never did. I just wanted you to love me without conditions." He laughed, same laugh as 6 months ago but rougher now, damaged by the heart attack and breathing tubes. "Love doesn't pay bills, Claire. You'll figure that out when you're 40 and alone and poor. Natalie is my family now. She takes care of me. She'll inherit everything, and she deserves it." Natalie moved to his bedside, possessive, victorious. She pressed the call button and told the nurse I was upsetting the patient. Security escorted me out while Father closed his eyes like I'd already ceased to exist. I made it to the stairwell before I started crying. Not because Head rejected me again. I'd expected that. But because there was no reaching him, no way to make him understand that I didn't want his fortune. I wanted a father who cared about my happiness more than his empire. That man didn't exist, maybe never had. I was mourning someone who'd never really been there. Then I heard Natalie's voice, sharp and clear in the stairwell echo. She was on her phone, one flight up, didn't realize I was below her. "The old fool nearly died. We need to speed things up. I'm not waiting years for this." I pressed myself against the wall, frozen. A man's voice responded, tinny through the phone speaker. I couldn't hear his words, but I heard her response. "I don't care, Gregory. Change the will this week. Once he's dead, we'll have everything. Then I'll divorce him if he somehow survives the next one." My blood went cold. The next one. She wasn't talking about naturally waiting for an elderly man to die. She was planning something. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Father's heart attack hadn't been random. His health had been perfect 6 months ago, and suddenly he's having cardiac events at 62? I remembered seeing prescription bottles on his nightstand, medications I didn't recognize. How easy would it be to tamper with those? To slowly poison someone while playing the devoted wife? Natalie hung up and her heels clicked up the stairs, away from me. I waited until silence returned before I moved. My mind was racing. Gregory, Father's business rival, Gregory Sloane, who'd been trying to acquire Hartwell properties for years. This was a conspiracy. Natalie had married Father to get inside his life, inside his finances, and she was working with Sloan to take down the company from within. I should have felt vindicated. This proved Natalie was exactly the monster I'd thought she was. But mostly I felt sick. Because I had information that could save Father's life, and I didn't know if I wanted to use it. Had been so cruel. Had tried to destroy me for wanting freedom. Part of me, a dark part I didn't like acknowledging, thought maybe he deserved whatever Natalie had planned. Maybe this was karma. I rode the train back to Queens in a daze. Mrs. Chen was in the hallway when I got home, and she took one look at my face and pulled me into her apartment. I told her everything, the hospital visit, the overheard conversation, my terrible conflict about what to do. She made tea and listened without judgment. Then she said something I'll never forget. You save him not because he deserves saving. You save him because you deserve to be person who saves him. Who you are is not about him, is about you. I didn't sleep for 3 days while I wrestled with the decision. Marcus said I should save Father because that's what good people do, and I was a good person. Iris said I wasn't responsible for him anymore, and I needed to protect my own peace. Mrs. Chen said sometimes walking away was the strongest choice. Everyone had opinions, but, ultimately, I was the one who had to live with whatever I decided. I thought about the man Father used to be, or maybe the man I'd imagined he was before I was old enough to see clearly. I thought about my mother, what she would want. She'd loved him once, enough to marry him, enough to have me. Would she want him to die at Natalie's hands, manipulated and betrayed? Probably not, but would she want me to sacrifice my peace for a man who'd never chosen me over his pride? I didn't know. In the end, I decided to warn him, but I wasn't going to beg him to believe me or put myself in his line of fire again. I borrowed money from Marcus and hired a private investigator, a former cop named Terry Chen who'd helped Mrs. Chen's nephew once. I gave him Natalie's information and asked him to dig. What he found was worse than I'd imagined. Natalie Morrison wasn't even her real name. She was born Rachel Kowalski in Pennsylvania. She'd been married before to a wealthy elderly man named Donald Morrison. He died suddenly of heart complications 6 months into the marriage. There'd been an insurance investigation, suspicions of foul play, but nothing they could prove. She'd inherited $3 million, taken the Morrison name, and reinvented herself. Father was her second target, and the stakes were much higher this time. Terry also found phone records. Hundreds of calls and texts between Natalie and Gregory Sloan, going back to before she even met Father. Messages about the company's vulnerabilities, about Father's medical information, about the will. She'd been feeding Sloan proprietary information for months. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was corporate espionage combined with conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was damning. But before I could do anything with the information, Natalie found out I was investigating. I don't know how, maybe Terry wasn't as discreet as he should have been, maybe she had her own people watching me. She filed harassment charges against me, claimed I was stalking her, that I'd threatened her at the hospital. Father's lawyers backed her up with affidavits. I had to appear in court, spend money on a lawyer I couldn't afford, defend myself against completely fabricated accusations. The charges were eventually dismissed because there was zero evidence, but it cost me time and energy and $1,500. It was another attack, another attempt to shut me down and shut me up. But it also told me I was onto something. Natalie was scared enough to lash out legally, which meant the evidence was solid enough to hurt her. I didn't go to Father. I went to Howard Chen, Father's oldest friend and the family's longtime attorney. Howard had always been kind to me, had seemed uncomfortable with how Father treated me but too loyal to intervene. I showed up at his office in Midtown with Terry's file and my recorded conversation from the hospital stairwell. Howard listened to everything without interrupting. His face got grayer with each revelation. He did his own investigation over the next 2 weeks. Confirmed everything Terry found and uncovered more. Natalie had been siphoning money from company accounts into offshore holdings, small amounts at first, then larger once she had VP access. She'd forged Father's signature on documents transferring stock to her name. She'd been systematically poisoning him with digitalis, a heart medication she was slipping into his morning coffee. Small doses that weakened his heart over time without being immediately obvious. Howard confronted Father with the evidence. brought police and federal investigators. They'd been building a case against Gregory Sloan for securities fraud, and Natalie's involvement gave them the connection they needed. Father initially refused to believe it. Natalie had that much control over him, but the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial trails, the toxicology report from hair samples that showed digitalis poisoning over months. They arrested Natalie at the penthouse. I wasn't there, but Howard told me about it later. She tried to lie at first, said it was all a misunderstanding. When that didn't work, she turned vicious. Screamed at Father that he was a narcissistic old fool if he thought anyone married him for love. That he was boring and cruel and Shed earned every penny she was taking. That Claire was the only one who'd ever actually cared about him and had thrown that away because he couldn't stand not being in control. Then she spit in his face. Gregory Sloan was arrested the same day for corporate espionage, securities fraud, and conspiracy. The prosecutors found evidence Head helped Natalie get access to Father, introduced them at that gallery opening. The whole relationship had been orchestrated to give Sloan inside access to Hartwell properties. Father's world imploded in 24 hours. His wife was a murderer, his business rival had infiltrated his life, everyone Head trusted had been using him. Howard called me after the arrests, told me Father wanted to see me. I almost said no, almost told Howard that Father had made his choice and now he could live with it. But something in Howard's voice, a kind of desperation, made me agree to one meeting. Just one. On my terms, in a neutral location. Not the penthouse, not his office. A coffee shop in Brooklyn where I felt safe. Father showed up to the coffee shop alone. No driver, no security, no entourage. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He sat down across from me and we stared at each other for a long moment. I didn't make it easy on him, didn't smile or offer comfort, just waited. You saved my life. After everything I did to you. His voice cracked on the last words. I sipped my coffee and chose my words carefully. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I'm not you. I'm not someone who watches people get hurt even when they deserve it. That's the difference between us. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Then he did something I'd never seen in my entire life. My father, Robert Hartwell, ruthless real estate mogul who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, put his head in his hands and cried. Not subtle tears, but full-body sobs that shook his shoulders. People in the coffee shop stared. I sat there, feeling numb, disconnected, watching this breakdown like it was happening to someone else's father. When he could finally speak, the words tumbled out in this desperate rush. He admitted He'd been wrong about everything. That He'd become his own father, the man He'd sworn He'd never be. Cold, controlling, measuring everything by money and power. After my mother died, He'd buried his heart in the business because grief was weakness and weakness got you destroyed. He'd raised me the same way, trying to make me strong by making me hard. But all He'd done was push away the only person who'd actually loved him unconditionally. I listened to all of it and I didn't soften. You gave me everything money could buy, and nothing money couldn't. I never wanted your wealth. I wanted your love. I wanted you to be proud of me for who I was, not what I achieved. I wanted you to care about my happiness more than your legacy, and you couldn't do that, so I walked away. He nodded, accepting it, not arguing. You laughed when I left. You thought it'd fail, thought it'd come crawling back, broken and desperate. But that was the moment I finally found myself. I'm happier now with nothing than I ever was with everything. I work with kids who'll never have the opportunities I had, and they're teaching me more about life than Harvard ever did. I have a boyfriend who makes me laugh, and doesn't care that I shop at thrift stores. I have friends who like me for me. I built this myself, and nobody can take it away from me. Father asked what He'd always asked. What can I do? How can I fix this? And for the first time, I had an answer that wasn't about us. Fund the community center, create scholarships for kids like the ones I work with. Build that affordable housing project I presented, the one you laughed at. Use your power to actually help people instead of just accumulating more power. Do something that matters. He agreed immediately, almost desperately, established a foundation in my mother's name that day, committed $50 million to start. called his board from the coffee shop, and told them Hartwell Properties was pivoting toward mixed income development. Some of them resigned on the spot. He didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't measuring success by quarterly profits. We didn't hug or reconcile dramatically. This wasn't a movie. I told him I needed time and space, that I didn't know if we could rebuild a relationship, but I was willing to try if he actually changed. Not just said head change, but proved it through actions. He agreed to monthly coffee meetings, neutral territory, no expectations, just two people trying to figure out if there was anything left to save. Over the next year, something shifted. Father stepped back from day-to-day operations at the company. Started actually working with the foundation, not just writing checks. Showed up to the community center unannounced one day and asked Iris how he could help. She put him to work painting classrooms, and I watched this man, who'd never done manual labor in his life, paint walls alongside teenagers from Brooklyn. He was terrible at it. The kids gave him a hard time. He smiled more that afternoon than I'd seen in years. He came to the youth program graduation, where I gave a speech about resilience, sat in the back of the auditorium and cried again when my kids received their certificates. Afterward, he met Marcus. I was terrified it would be awkward, or that father would revert to his old judgmental self. But he shook Marcus' hand and said, "She speaks very highly of you. Treat her well." It wasn't warm, but it was respectful. That was progress. When Marcus proposed, simple and perfect in Prospect Park, with a ring head saved for months to buy, I called father to tell him. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe because, despite everything, he was still my dad and I wanted him to know I was happy. He asked if he could come to the wedding. Not walk me down the aisle, he knew he hadn't earned that, just attend if I'd allow it. I talked to Marcus about it for days before deciding yes, he could come. He could even walk me down the aisle if he promised not to make it about him. The wedding was small, at the community center where we'd met. Iris officiated. My kids from the program filled the front rows. Mrs. Chen wore a bright red dress and cried through the whole ceremony. Father showed up in a suit, but not one of his usual $3,000 ones. Something more modest, more appropriate. When it was time, he offered his arm and whispered, "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become." I let myself believe he meant it. The letter father had laughed at, the one I'd placed on his desk 18 months ago, he kept it framed in his office. He told me later he read it whenever he felt himself slipping into old patterns. The line about rather having nothing and being free had haunted him. Made him realize Head built a prison for himself too, just one with better furniture than the one Head built for me. I'd be lying if I said everything was perfect. Father still frustrated me sometimes with his inability to turn off the business brain. He still occasionally tried to give me money, which I always refused. We had arguments about boundaries and respect. But he was trying, genuinely trying, and that meant something. We had a relationship now built on honesty, instead of control. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted as a child, but it was real, and real mattered more than perfect. My life, a year and a half after walking away, looked nothing like the life I'd been raised to live. I still lived in Queens, though Marcus and I had moved into a slightly bigger apartment together. I still worked at the community center, now as director of programs. I still shopped at thrift stores and rode the subway and lived on a budget. The foundation father established had funded 3 affordable housing developments, full scholarships for 27 kids, and grants for 12 community organizations. His company was less profitable but more ethical. He was less powerful but more human. People ask me if I regret giving up $85 million. The answer is no, not even a little bit. That money came with invisible chains that would have bound me forever. Walking away from it was the most expensive thing I ever did and the most valuable. Because I learned something crucial. You can't put a price on freedom. You can't buy self-respect. You can't inherit identity. Those things you have to claim for yourself, and they're worth more than any fortune. My father laughed when I gave up my inheritance. He thought I was being naive, childish, foolish. Now he tells people, I'm the wisest person he knows. Not because I walked away from money, but because I walked toward myself. I traded luxury for authenticity, security for autonomy, approval for self-respect. Best deal I ever made. The tiny apartment Marcus and I share holds more love than the penthouse ever did. The work I do matters in ways that maximizing shareholder value never could. The relationships I've built are real, chosen, not obligated. This life I've constructed from nothing is mine in a way the life I was born into never was. I own it completely. Nobody can take it from me because nobody gave it to me. I earned it by having the courage to lose everything. So, yeah, Father laughed at my letter, but I got the last laugh. Because while he was building empires, I was building a life. And my life, simple and small, and completely mine, is the real inheritance my mother left me. The knowledge that love doesn't come with conditions and freedom is worth any sacrifice. I'm Claire Hartwell Morrison. I'm 33 years old. I gave up $85 million. And I've never been richer. So here's my question for you. What would you choose? Security with strings attached or freedom with uncertainty? Have you ever had to walk away from something everyone else thought you were crazy to leave? Drop your story in the comments because I'd love to hear it. If this story resonated with you at all, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. And subscribe because real stories like this, stories about finding yourself when the world tries to tell you who to be, that's what we're all about here. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought, controlled, or inherited. They're the ones you build yourself, one brave choice at a time. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you're worth more than anyone's expectations of you.